beautiful humans. Welcome to another episode on Creative Street. Today is episode 4, released on 10/25, named What Motivates Us. So this is an interesting topic for me, right? Because there's so many things in life that can motivate us. There's so many there's so many variables when it comes to motivation, right? A lot of it can come from external factors, a lot of it can come from internal factors. However, when we're talking about creativity, or when I talk about creativity, the first thing that I think of when it comes to that is this intrinsic need for creativity, right? This thing that humans have that motivates us to create, right? Like even something like there's something genetic about it. One of the most obvious examples of that genetic need for creation is our want to reproduce, right? Reproduction is like the obvious example. We want to procreate and create new life and pass down our genetic material. But if we look at creation as not just this act of reproduction, but an act of something new, right? I think that there is a psychological driver, right? There is the genetic material that something, okay, how to say it. There's something in our genetics that give us dopamine boosts and these rewards. There's like reward pathways when you create something, especially when you fail and then you try again and then it works, right? There's a reward path that is, I think, very ingrained, like within us, for when it comes to creation. I have to do a little bit more research on that. But so that'll be a topic for a different episode. What I really wanted to focus on for this one, aside from the physiological things that motivate us, I want to talk about more of the abstract things that can motivate us, right? So and when I say abstract, I mean the non-physical things, not the things that our physiology like shoots out in our reward system to condition us for motivation, but the abstract things, right? So what is motivation? Like, a goal, right? When you set a goal for yourself, that is adding fuel to this fire that you have, that you want to reach this thing. There's a book called Human Motivation by Robert E. Franken, where he defines creativity as a tendency to generate or recognize ideas, alternatives, or possibilities that may be useful in solving problems, in communicating with others and entertaining others, or like ourselves and others. And he goes on to say that 3 reasons why people are motivated, right, to be creative, is a need for something novel, so like varied and complex, like stimulation, right? Like we're always looking for something new, because in psychology, right, like they talk about like desensitization. There comes a point where you're constantly exposed to the same thing that it no longer phases you, right? I listen to a lot of conspiracy podcasts, so a lot of people are saying that that's why, like, aliens have been a hot topic for years. It's like government trying to desensitize us to the conversation of aliens, so that once they announce that aliens are a thing, which how they did last year or the year before, like nobody really was like, oh, aliens. Like it didn't really matter because it desensitized us to it, right? I know that's completely off the wall topic, but I listen to conspiracy theories. I think they're fun. Um, you got to be very selective with what you believe, but I think they're fun. It's always good to know these things. But yeah, like that's what desensitization is, right? Where you get so used to this thing that it no longer phases you. You're just like, oh yeah, like that's a thing. Cool. Everybody knew that, right? And so creativity is the act of bringing something new, of creating something, of giving your brain and your body a different type of stimulation, something that it hasn't experienced recently. So it makes it novel and it makes it fun and exciting. I think that's also a very important thing, right? Because if not, we get bored with life as humans. I don't know about you guys, but for me, I get bored so easily. Like the shiny object syndrome and the ADD is real, in the sense that I have not been diagnosed like that, guys. It's just it's real in the sense that if it's not new, it's not fun, it's not exciting, I get bored. And I think there's a beauty in stability, but there's something that's missing, um, in terms of like spice of life. When something becomes repetitive and becomes boring, it feels like you're just going through the cycles. It's this monotonous thing. And creativity, allowing yourself to be creative and finding ways of uh you know creating new stimulation and excitement in your life, is really important, to just keep yourself interested in life. I think we've gotten to the point where we're so self-aware of our own mortality that we need to give ourselves something, right? Some motivation, some excitement, something that keeps us in the hamster wheel we've created for ourselves, right? Waking up, going to work, making money so we can pay for our box, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like that's a whole hamster wheel. And so we look for these creative ways to keep our lives spicy and exciting. So it keeps us motivated to continue living and to continue, working through whatever it is you're working through. Another reason that he says that, like why people are motivated to be creative, is because we need to communicate ideas and values, right? There comes a point where new words are generated, or words are stringed together, and they create this new concept, right? Because and they're concepts that maybe they've always been there, but they haven't been articulated, they haven't been identified, like they haven't manifested, or nobody has really talked about it in this new realm. And so creativity allows you to, like, the motivation behind being creative allows you is this want to express a new idea or to create a new concept, right? Like who doesn't want to make up a new word and then see like your word travel around the world and people using whatever slang you created, or coined a new phrase or whatever? Like that's so cool. It's like leaving your mark on human history. Or like using the same language that we've had forever to create this whole new concept, this like the concept of like AI, right? that was only that was only brought into existence because you were able to piece these different things, like the word the internet, and like the ether and all of this, and like the cloud, and you string them all together to create this whole new concept, this whole new baby that then impacts the upcoming generation, that impacts the current generation, and it impacts the way history is going to develop from here on out, so that's a motivating factor in why you want to be creative, right? Because you want to communicate with people, and you want to communicate your ideas and your values. Your values are so important, whether you think about it or not actively. You are always communicating your values to the people you care about, to new relationships you're trying to build, in subtle ways, right? You may not be saying, I value the truth, but you, like, in the way you compose yourself, and the way you articulate yourself, and the way that you express yourself, and you expect the other person to communicate with you, you're putting your values onto, this new relationship. You're saying, I trust you because I value the truth, and I believe that you're telling me the truth, right? Yeah. So creativity, motivation is trying to communicate ideas and values. The last one that he mentions is to solve problems, which that's such a natural thing when it comes to creativity that we may take it for granted, right? How many times has there been a problem presented? Many, many times throughout history, there's a problem happening, right? This happens like within your family, it happens at work. I can think about it more at work, right? Right now I am part of like this group that we're supposed to sorry. We're supposed to we're like leaders of okay, backtrack. It's like this program that's supposed to get a bunch of different leaders from my job, and we're supposed to, I guess it's like a training for higher leadership, and it's supposed to give you the bigger picture, right? It's supposed to give you practical knowledge and practice on that bigger picture. So part of our group's thing is we want to identify areas that are currently problems throughout our company, and then find a creative solution to this problem, and then propose it to the higher ups of the company. And so like that's where I can see this need to problem solve, right? What motivates us to be creative is to solve complex problems, and maybe problems that they don't do maybe a big impact in like the short span, but maybe a impact in the long term, right? And it's essentially being creative and finding ways that this information connects, and then how to address these different problems and stuff. And you need to be creative. Like, I've noticed that I've had to get so creative, and not just our approach and like how we're going to communicate these ideas, right? Going back to communication of ideas and values, not only how we're going to communicate this information to those higher ups and do our whole presentation. And guys, I'm doing a podcast, but I'm not good at public speaking. You put me on the spot and I will freeze up and I'll laugh like a psycho because I get nervous, which I'm working on. It's my public speaking goal of the year is, get better at communicating and expressing myself without being so nervous, right? Hence part of this podcast is practice for that. But that that project is going to force me to be in that moment at some point, right? But getting back to the point, the creativity is not only in how I'm going to present and how I'm going to speak, like within my group and all of that, and how we're going to communicate this information to to the higher ups. Sorry, I need a cup of water, so I'm going to take a pause in a little bit so I can go get that. But the I've had to get creative on how I manage with these other leaders as well, right? Because we all are very strong-headed and we have our opinions and we have these our vision for what we want, what problem we want to address, right? So I've had to get people creative. And how am I going to express my opinions while listening and validating those of my colleagues while collaborating and working together and getting to meet in the middle, right? And that takes a lot of like creative power for these type of things. I'm gonna move on from this though, but let me take a quick pause. I'm gonna go get some water, so just give me a little bit. And I'm back. Thank you so much. So yeah, I definitely needed this. My throat was super dry. All right. So we're talking about motivation and creativity, right? Or in rather in like creating stuff, right? I already mentioned creativity, or rather motivation, comes from both realms of the physical, right? Like physical motivations and the outside. So like, you know, your family or your friends or external factors that influence your motivation, as well as your internal wants and desires that influence your motivation. So I've been reading this, okay, so it's this like sex guru, okay? And it sounds so weird, but Osho is like this this guru. They call him the sex guru, but he had like, point being, he has a book called Creativity. And there he talks about a bunch of different things, where every now and then I'm going to throw in some stuff from him, because it's very spiritual, it's very abstract. I like the way he phrases things and he articulates things, and then he gives, I'm a very I like Buddha, I like Zen stuff, I like Taoism. So throughout the book, he gives these different like references, like Zen references and stories that reflect these ideas, right? So okay, regarding motivation, he he breaks down creativity like in different ways. He says that as humans, we're inspired by many things. And like I mentioned earlier, like there's this weird yearning inside of humans to create things. We have a desire to create whatever that creativity is, right? Or whatever way you express it, doesn't matter. There's a yearning there. I personally think it has to do with remembrance, right? Which I'm going to do a whole episode on when it comes to creativity and death. But there's this psychological need to be remembered, like, because we realize and we recognize our own mortality. And so we create things to make our mark, right? We want to do something that's going to leave a mark, that's going to leave a long-lasting impression where people are going to remember us. There's a whole conversation, I'm going to go into that, and research that I've done, because death is going to sound very morbid, but death is one of my favorite topics. Like how we live constantly aware of our own mortality And yet we continue to live and we strive and we struggle and we move forward as humans. We find ways. Not everybody wins that battle, but those who do find ways to relate and continue to push forward, even though we acknowledge and we're aware of our own mortality. It's a whole realm that I love to talk about. But again, aside from the point, essentially he says that our human experience, Osho says that our human experience is contained within 3 dimensions, right? There's the dimension of the being, right? So he relates this to our consciousness, right? So the person sitting here is talking to you right now. Then there's the dimension of feeling, right? So our compassion, our emotions, are the way that things outside make us feel and how we make others feel, etc. Right? So there's this realm of emotion. And then the last one is in the dimension of action. So physical things you do in your life, right? Because I am conscious in that I can speak to you and I'm articulating things to you, but then I'm conscious in a different level relating to the world around me, creating things, doing things, right? And so he calls this dimension of action creativity. Sorry. And action contains all types of creativity. He says that, okay, I'm going to do a direct quote. And one has to be creative. If your love is only a feeling and it's not translated into action, it won't affect the larger humanity. You have to make it a reality. You have to materialize it. And that's what that's end of quote, from page 4. And that's what creativity is, right? It's this call to action. Creativity is a call to translate whatever you're feeling, whatever your consciousness has, make it into a physical reality. Action, he defines it as the situation. Sorry. I'm gonna skip over that because I kind of already said that. And I don't want to make it redundant. So, okay. He makes it a point to talk about action versus activity, right? So, and this is how I was thinking about it when I was reading it. For those of you that say you're not creative, right? And even for us that we are creatives, but we don't approach creativity or like our hobby or whatever it is that you work on, our craft, in this way. He makes it a genuine difference. So action is, and he says it's a paradox. Action is inaction. Give you an example. When you get into the zone of something, right? So for those of you that are creatives, whatever your passion is, when you get into that zone and you're not second guessing, you're not thinking of what it is that you're making, that's what he calls action. You're not guessing, you're not thinking, you're just doing, right? That happens to me all the time. It's why a lot of my pieces, they're abstract and they're not like sketches and they're not something physical that you can see, because I like to throw paint, throw some water on it, throw some alcohol, and just let it become. And I'm not afraid that I'm gonna mess up because I'm just letting it be. I'm just doing actions. However, he describes activity, which is like, it's kind of the same thing, but it's not. Activity is doing something deliberate. It's where, so I made the painting, I've been calling it the Mercury. It's the mermaid fairy painting. Um that one was activity. I couldn't just let my paint do what it wanted to do. I mean, and the face and like it had to be, the face had to be perfect, right? Because nobody wants to look at an image that doesn't have like a pretty face. And I was looking for this thing called perfection, which doesn't exist, by the way. In the creative world, perfection doesn't exist. Um but he describes activity as that, like that restlessness. And I get that way, and this is why I don't have many paintings that are actual things like animals or humans, because I get into this mindset of like it needs to be perfect, and then I don't allow myself to mess up, and then it just becomes annoying, and it becomes this thing that then I hate doing, right? And he talks about activity as being that restlessness. It's the, you're doing it with an intention and with a thing, but it doesn't really matter, right? Like, this is going to sound weird, but when I paint something, I shouldn't be painting it with other people in mind, right? I should be doing it with myself in mind, with just wanting to be happy with what I make, or just allowing the thing to be. When I was working on Mercury, I wanted to make something that other people will see it and really, really like it. And I wasn't doing it, part of it wasn't doing it for me. Do you get me? Like, I wasn't trying to please myself. I was trying to please others. Like, you can ask anybody who knows me how many times, like my partner, or like my really close friends and my sisters and my siblings, sorry, I asked them like 500 times, what do you think of the face? What do you think of the face? What do you think of the face? To the point where I looked at it and I worked on it so much that I was just like, I'm over this. I'm so over it. And I didn't work on it for months because I couldn't bring myself to just accept it. And that's the difference that he's talking about when creativity is this action instead of activity, right? Action is you do. Activity is you're doing because of a thing. Like you're, how do I like you're gonna receive something from it, or you're doing it with a goal, or it only serves a purpose, and that's it. To be creative is to just do and let things be, and there's beauty in the imperfection of it. I'm gonna move on from this topic, where there's gonna be other points and other episodes where I'm gonna come back to similar points. But I wanted to clarify these three states that we exist in, like that we don't really pay too much attention to, right? The consciousness versus the physical reality versus our emotional state. Because even our emotional state is its own thing, right? That's why some people, they'd rather, like, I know for me, if I ever get into like an argument or I'm feeling some sort of way, even if it's a positive, I may step away from the situation, because I know that my consciousness versus, which I think people call that like the logic, is being overridden by a different version of Stephanie when she's in her emotions, right? Like you have one version. I'm going to talk about myself. I'm one Stephanie talking to you all. I'm another Stephanie when I'm in my emotions, and I'm another Stephanie when I'm communicating and relating to the world around me. And it's important to, and I don't think that we are in that zone all the time, because you can go crazy. Like, right? It's like, oh my God, I'm this Stephanie now, and then I'm this stuff. Like it's so natural that we're constantly flowing that you don't even realize it, because, and then that's what we see ourselves as, our whole, right? It's that the meshing of the three. But it's very important to acknowledge that you are different versions of yourself, even, depending on who you're talking to, whether you're alone or with somebody else, and who that person is, or how many people are around, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're always different versions of ourselves. And it's very important to acknowledge that. Moving on, because this is about motivation and creativity. So when you're creating something, right, there is something valuable that we gain from creating. It's like I mentioned earlier, those reward pathways, whether it's that burst of dopamine where you're just like, oh yes, right? Or you failed and you learned something. That's still that, like, when you learn something, it feels good, right? So it may not feel good to fail, but it feels good when you realize, oh, that's why that didn't work. And then you try it and then it happens. Like, that feels so satisfying. And that's so valuable to just how we think about things and how we translate things into the world. To add to what was his name, to Robert Franken's 3 reasons for motivation, right? He says that it has to, that creativity, motivation behind creativity, it needs to be novel. There's this other author, I think he's a professor, double check me guys. He writes a book called Creativity Beyond the Myth of the Genius. His name is Robert Weisberg. He quotes, I quote, "All who study creativity agree that for something to be creative, it's not enough for it to be novel. It must have value or be appropriate to the cognitive demands of the situation." In other words, it doesn't only need to be new, it needs to trigger something in you, right? How many times have you experienced something new, right? Like your first day of school or first day of class or whatever, but it's whatever, right? Like I've done that, where you show up to something and you're just like, yeah, this isn't new, this is weird, but whatever. Like it doesn't really do anything for me, right? So it's not just that it needs to be new, but it needs to ignite something in you. It needs to be like where you, okay, so I've been through several museums. This is my geeky side. I've gone through many museums, and I can tell you, I've been through museums where, and it has to do maybe with like the exhibit, or maybe like the stuff wasn't really captivating. When I was at UF, when I was studying at UF, the what's it called? Oh my God, I forget the name of the museum that they have there, but I would go almost like every weekend. And when I would see some of the paintings, it's just, it wasn't like, on the contrary, I was like, oh, like, why is this considered art? And that sounds so mean and so judgy, and I'm sorry. I was a kid, but it's true. It didn't really ignite anything in me. And then you would get to this. So I remember they had this one exhibit, and I'm a geek when it comes to like African stuff, especially anything having to do with the African diaspora, in Cuba, and like the relationship of Santeria and Umbanda and all of that, and voodoo. It's another side of me that may or may not come out. Um, they had this exhibit, and I remember walking through, and I was like, meh, to like some of the paintings, and then I got to the African exhibit, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is now this is art. Like, this is amazing, right? It triggered something in me. And then that day, I remember I got home and I was just like, I need to make something. I need to write something. And I did. I wrote this short excerpt, and just inspired from that exhibit. And again, creativity needs this. It's not just that it needs something new, right, to inspire you. It needs to have some sort of value for you. It needs to touch something in you, whatever your core values are, whatever your sub core values are. It needs to hit something for you to be like, ooh, I want to make something now. Like, I was so inspired. I was so motivated, or I see this problem, and this is how I can approach it. Like, this just like connected the dots, and it makes me want to do this thing. And it's interesting, right? Because novel can be so many, like, does novel need to be this grandiose, giant, brand new change? I don't think so. There's so many things in the world that are already created. And like, if you think you're the only one that came up with this idea, I promise you you're not, because it's the stuff is out there in the ether, right? And it goes to whoever is open to receiving that information. That's one of my woo-woo beliefs. That's one of my believies. But it doesn't have to be this grandiose new thing, right? I argue that even somebody who can copy an image, like paint it themselves, um like, let's say like there is like a Van Gogh, and like I really like that Van Gogh, and I was able to imitate that Van Gogh. I argue that's to a degree creative. It's novel, not because it's like a different painting, but it's novel in that my brushstrokes aren't going to be the same as Van Gogh's brushstrokes. The way that I envision and I drew the swirl is not going to be the same way that he did his swirl. Maybe he started up, down, and I'm going down, up, Um, novel doesn't have to be this thing. I'm sorry guys. I may not be articulating it right, but it doesn't have to be so big. A novel thing is just something unique, right? Novel is uniqueness, is to bring something new, whatever that newness is. If you really think about it, everybody has been influenced by someone else, and by someone else, and by other things. And it's like this giant linking chain of creativity built upon each other, right? That's how we make progress. And I put this in quotation because, like, what really is progress? But creativity is like this linked chain. We all influence each other and we all inspire one another. The only difference is that these individuals that we call geniuses, right? Like the Mozarts, the Beethovens, the Van Goghs, the Picassos. All they did was they linked to the chain to the chain link before them, and they made a big enough novel action, right? Like it was a change that was big enough that allowed the link to like split, right? Because somebody's going to come in and still get inspired by the other link and create and continue on that version. But what they did was they saw that and they were like, ooh, aside from this, you can also do this thing. And then it created their own separate link. But we're all part of the same thing. We're all part of the same big chain. And value. I wanted to talk about value because value can be a lot of things. Value can be valuable to somebody else. It can be valuable to the world. It can be valuable to yourself. I think it's very important to understand when something is valuable. Even if it's not valuable to me, if it brings you mental stability, if it brings you mental peace, if it brings you like joy, whatever that thing brings you, that's valuable. If it even takes away your peace of mind, that may not be valuable, but at least personally, I don't think so. But value doesn't have to be for somebody else. Value doesn't have to be to the world. Value can be something valuable for yourself. So just think about that when you're creating something. You're not looking for it to be valuable to others. If it brought you peace of mind, if it brought you happiness, if it brought you solace, whatever it is, that's valuable. This philosopher Emile Chiron, I've been reading some of his work. He's a very he's a philosopher that's like obsessed with death, and I mentioned it earlier. Death is one of my favorite topics. It sounds very morbid, and I promise you I'm not suicidal or anything like that, but it's just such an interesting topic, right? Like just religiously, abstractly, physiologically, what happens in death and our relationship to death is so interesting. He's a philosopher and he likes to talk a lot about death, and he won like a bunch of like prizes and stuff, and there was this time where people were telling him like, why do you write the way that you write? Because he doesn't write in a cohesive way. Like he doesn't write so that you can understand what he's saying. He writes the way that we think, right? Where like, and this, and then that, and then this, and then that. And he'll leave out information where you're just like, how are you making these jumps, right? How are you sorry, how are you connecting the dots? And people would ask him like, why do you write this way? Like, what's the motivation behind this? People can't understand when you write this way. And he responded with something along the lines of, I didn't write it for anybody. I didn't write it for you guys to read. For me, writing is suicide postponed. Writing is a necessity for him. Writing was something that brought him peace. It brought him down to earth. It brought him an escape from his insomnia. It brought him an escape from the life that he was living. And it allowed him to just be. And he won all these prizes because people read it and they were astonished. They were, it was beautiful. Like his metaphors, his similes, his if you Google him, you'll find like a bunch of quotes from him, because he said what he wanted to say. No filter, no questions asked, nothing. It's just he said what he wanted to say. And he was never writing for anybody else. He was writing for himself. And that is valuable. That is what others saw. Like, others saw that and they were like, wow, this man is amazing. This man is amazing. We need to give him all these prizes, because he was just doing something that was valuable to himself, and therefore other people saw the value in that. Anyways, point being, guys, whatever motivates you, whatever your medium is, it's only possible by you. Look how many Instagram and TikTok reels exist for artists that make paint-pour pieces. They could use the same exact product, the same exact color, even the same exact process, and yet the artwork will never look identical. And that is because it's unique to the creator. Whatever is made is unique to the person making it. It's a reflection of themselves and the world around them. I like to think of it as like a version of me captured in time. As John Briggs from Fire in the Crucible plainly says, because each of us are different, each is endowed by those differences with special sensitivities to some subtle dimension of reality that others overlook. And why not? The universe itself is infinitely subtle. Point being, whatever motivates you, whatever drives you, whatever you find valuable that you get from creating something in this world, do it wholeheartedly, and forget what haters say. Forget what the world says. Even sometimes we tell ourselves that we're not good at something, and it's not about being good. It's about what that makes you feel, and the joy and the peace of mind and that meditative state that we can get from it. So keep on creating. Forget people. Do what you love because you love to do it, not because you want others to see you. So that's all I got for you for today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it helped. I am going to drop a Q&A question and a poll on Spotify. If you're interested in participating, I would really appreciate it. My question is, what motivates you to create, right? I want to know. We have so many different motivations, and I'd be curious to know, what are some things that motivate you all? And my poll is creativity an action, or isn't it just an activity to you? What do you think? So yeah, I hope you enjoy. Thank you for listening. If you haven't already, hit the little bell, follow me, subscribe. New episodes are released every Wednesday, minisodes on Friday. Stay tuned for this Friday's minisode. It's going to be about Halloween. Halloween's coming up, guys. Dude, I made this really cool Halloween collab with fellow podcasters. So check it out. It's gonna drop Halloween day. And this Friday's minisode is gonna be all creepy things that humans have created throughout life, like the book that's made with like human skin. It's freaking weird. We make some weird stuff. So I'm gonna do a minisode on that. So check it out. Hope you enjoy. Thank you again for tuning in with me. Love you all. Stay creative.